Welcome to my video on the Forgetful Fives. This video is intended for my mid-stage instrument students working on instrument approach. Well, here's our poor friend again, dealing with a problem that I see all too often. We get to the final approach fix, and I ask, what's your MDA? Well, they look down at the approach plate, lose the heading and altitude. They sometimes misread the plate and get the wrong altitude. A recent student failed this check ride for this reason. So what to do? So I've been searching for ways to help students develop techniques to avoid missing something in their approach setups. I tried various pre-approach checklists and mnemonic memory aids with mixed results. I suggested using post-it notes placed near the altimeter or the clock. This has worked well for some students, but not everyone. I challenged a recent student to help me find a better way. Our training program was fast-paced, flying daily. We tried several ideas with moderate success. Brainstorming after one flight, I said, here are the things that students constantly miss. It was a surprisingly short list, so rather than focused on checklists and mnemonics that included things that generally are not missed, I realized that a short list of things that are commonly missed might work better. So I came up with the original 4 almost immediately. The commonly missed items were GPS versus Vorlock, that is the toggle between are you looking at your GPS or your VOR data. The final descent altitude, that is the bottom of the approach, whether it's the MDA, the decision height, or the decision altitude. Timing from the final approach fix to the missed approach point. And presetting the CTAF, that's the Unicom or tower frequency, in the correct place. Well, the original idea was to try to create a GUMP-like memory aid. So this student came up with CATS, or CATS. It was hard to remember which task was associated with each letters. So other students came up with ideas, but they all had the same problem. It just took too much mental energy to remember what the letters meant. By the way, somewhere in the process I added a 5th item. I realized that reporting the landing checklist is another item that is commonly forgotten. So now the Forgetful 4s are now the Forgetful 5, which is the title of this video. Well, the cure for the forgetfuls. Sitting at my desk, pondering the problem one evening, the cure popped into my head. No mnemonics, just a catchy phrase which contained the forgetful items. Flip-flop and start-stop go well together as a memory aid. The check, or checklist, is sort of an odd one, but it seems tack on, and so let's now take a look at breaking them down. What do we have here? Well, the first 2 are flip-flop. Flip-flop are catchy and go naturally together. They represent items that are normally toggled in most airplanes. So flip is the flip between tower and approach. Typically, you're talking to approach at the last minute just before the final approach fix. You're told to go to tower or you switch to advisory. And you really want to have that frequency ready to go, so you just push the flip-flop or swap. Even when approach control gives you correct frequency, it's best to avoid fumbling with radios and tuning them at a critical time. Location for the preload is the subject of another video on comm radio strategy. Flop is the toggle between GPS and Vorlock. You need to make sure that you're on Vorlock or VLOC during the final approach segments of any radio-based approach, and conversely, you need to be on GPS when you're shooting a GPS approach. So that's 2 down. Let's look at the next 2. Start-stop is another catchy combination. Start is to be ready to start timing at the final approach fix. The time can be written down on a post-it note or just stuck in your memory. Either way, you need to be set prior to the final approach fix. Otherwise, you're going to risk blowing the approach while you look for it and looking down at your approach plate at a time when you should be focusing on approach procedure and keeping the needles where they're supposed to be. Start should remind you also to zero the timer if you have one. Stop is stop your descent. So stop your descent at the final altitude on the approach. While all altitudes are important, this is the one that's most critical, and you generally need to search for it in a table on the approach, unlike other altitudes. So it's very easy to look down, grab the wrong one when you're under the pressure to fly the final segment of the approach. That mistake can be dangerous or cause you to bust your check ride. So you should declare out loud prior to the final approach fix, and I recommend about 2 miles from the final approach fix, that the landing checklists are complete. That doesn't mean that you start doing the landing checklist or you pull out the checklist and start fumbling with. All that means is that you have previously completed all the items, and you should declare out loud even when you're alone in the airplane. Even the FAA recommends talking to yourself out loud. It's actually a good habit. So check is the final one. It seems kind of odd, but it's relatively easy to remember. By the way, and as an aside, I don't generally recommend gear and flaps at the final approach fix. I find that this causes a significant trim change, and many autopilots, like my SX55, start to command significant pitch excursions. So I recommend that the airplane be trimmed and that the gear and flaps be in the proper position prior to the final approach fix. And if you're doing a couple approach, you'll find that that generally works much better than dropping gear and flaps at the final approach fix. So when to do that? Well, none of this is valuable unless you build a habit of using them. Habits are formed by repeating the same thing every time in the same way. During your approach training phase, try to do these in the same way. I recommend that you pick a point, and I like 2 miles prior to the final approach fix. And that's a good point to flip-flop, start-stop, check. It only takes a second, and it's about the right time to make sure that you're all set and ready to go. Your gear should already be down at the point in time, your fuel should be set, carburetor heat if it's necessary, and power should be ready to go. And so this is a good time to report that. This is also the point where a GPS approach goes from the normal terminal mode into the approach mode. So it's also a point where you'd call approach mode is active. Lastly, over the years, I have seen that when a student approaches the final approach fix, clear head and everything set, even the early stage students execute the procedure quite well. Any distraction, no matter how small, tends to cause them to break their scan and struggle to get back on track. There's a lot of elements in an approach to setup, and it's easy to forget one. My forgetful list is by no means complete, but it does include the most common things that people will forget. Every approach has something unique to remember. Our goal is to approach the fix confidently, knowing that all the things that need to be done are done, and all we have to do is follow the needle. Flow and rhythm are the keys to a smooth and accurate approach. Well, this may or may not be the do-all, end-all, and maybe ultimately I'll abandon this approach. But right now it seems to be working, and I have been experimenting with some of my students, and so I'm going to continue to advocate for students to use this. Now, using these catchy phrases works pretty good. It isn't perfect, and it requires some practice. Appreciate any feedback. So thanks for watching, and I hope this helps.